Can we hang out with non-Christians? The answer is yes. Jesus visited the house of Simon the Pharisee in Luke chapter 7 verses 36 to 50. We don't know if Simon ever actually converted, but Jesus actually went to his house. And Job, even though he was annoyed by his friends, and his friends were taunting him and telling him how bad he was, they were still his friends at the end of his story, even though God condemned them himself, according to Job chapter 42, verse 7. You can even marry from outside the faith, like what Moses did with Zipporah in Exodus chapter 2, verse 21. So, when we are looking at some verses in the Bible, we have to know how to interpret them. For example, let's take these two verses from St. Paul. But now I have written unto you not to keep company, if any man that is called a brother be a fornicator, or covetous, or an idolater, or a railer, or a drunkard, or an extortioner, with such a one know not to eat. 1 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 11. Be ye not unequally yoked together with unbelievers. For what fellowship hath righteousness with unrighteousness? And what communion hath light with darkness? 2 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 14. These verses do not mean that we can't physically hang out with unbelievers, because in the Bible, a lot of things are not physical. What these verses are telling us is that we shouldn't share the same goals as a person who is outside the faith. We shouldn't share the same beliefs as an unbeliever. They trust in the world while we trust in God. As it was said in Psalms, some trust in chariots and some in horses, but we will remember the name of the Lord our God. Psalms chapter 20 verse 7. We can also look at Jeremiah chapter 17 verses 5 to 8 and Isaiah chapter 31 verse 1. The Christian is eventually going to end up loving the world, even though the love of the world is condemned. As it was said by John, love not the world, neither the things that are in the world. If any man love the world, the love of the Father is not in him. For all that is in the world, the lust of the flesh, and the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life, is not of the Father, but is of the world. And the world passeth away, and the lust thereof. But he that doeth the will of God abideth forever. 1 John chapter 2, verses 15 to 17. We can also look at Philippians chapter 4, verse 6. The Israelites fell into this trap as well. They had nothing to do with the Gentiles. They were not supposed to be adopting their customs or traditions, but look what happened in 1 Samuel chapter 8. They wanted a king. Not because it would be good for them, no, it was just because that was what the Gentiles had. They were looking up to what the Gentiles were looking up to. Just like air mixed with smog is polluted, when the Israelites were mixing their holy customs with the pagan traditions of the Gentiles, they were considered polluted too. As it was said in Lamentations, they have wandered as blind men in the streets. They have polluted themselves with blood, so that men could not touch their garments. Lamentations chapter 4, verse 14. This is so much more important than physically staying away from non-Christians. The spiritual always triumphs against the physical. You have to tackle the spiritual side of believing in God rather than the physical side. Plus, if you hang out with non-Christians, not actually going out of your way to hang out with non-Christians, just by happenstance you happen to know them, you could actually go and convert them to the faith. As it was said in James, Brethren, if any of you do err from the truth, and one convert him, let him know that he which converteth the sinner from the error of his way shall save a soul from death, and shall hide a multitude of sins. James chapter 5, verses 19 to 20. My advice would be then, we should have different goals from the goals of worldly people. We should be focusing on how we can serve God and how we can improve our families and how we can bring people to the faith. Not on trying to look down on people just because they aren't Christian, instead of focusing on ourselves. All we need to do is worry about being in agreement with God. According to Amos chapter 3, verse 3, God is going to deal with non-Christians later. And that is where I'm going to stop with this Bible Q&A. Can we hang out with non-Christians? Sure, but we cannot believe in what they believe. Thank you for listening. Don't forget to like and subscribe.